The Uncomfortable Truths Behind the Millionaire Mind by Wealthy Mindset Audiobooks. There is a point where financial growth stops being about effort and starts being about emotional restraint, where progress quietly demands that you let go of approval, comfort, and the need to be seen as good. This book begins at that uncomfortable moment most people turn away from. There is a moment that arrives quietly, almost apologetically, long before any visible sign of success shows up in your life. No one congratulates you for it. There is no applause, no number on a screen, no proof you can point to. It arrives as a subtle discomfort, an internal friction that makes you pause and wonder why something that looks like progress on the outside feels emotionally wrong on the inside. Many people dismiss this feeling. They label it doubt, fear, or weakness. But that moment is often the first real signal that something meaningful has begun to shift. You might recognize it in small ways. You make a decision that looks responsible, even admirable, yet it leaves you unsettled. You choose restraint over indulgence, patience over praise, and instead of feeling proud, you feel strangely isolated. There is a tension between who you are becoming and how you are being perceived. Part of you wants reassurance, wants to be told you are doing the right thing. Another part knows, quietly, stubbornly, that explaining yourself would dilute the very clarity you are trying to protect. This is where many people get stuck. They work harder, say the right things, behave better, follow the rules they were told would lead to fulfillment. From the outside, they appear disciplined and responsible. From the inside, something feels increasingly misaligned. The effort is real, but the satisfaction is thin. The discipline is there, but the peace is missing. It is exhausting to keep moving forward while constantly questioning whether you are betraying some invisible expectation along the way. And then the paradox reveals itself. Progress, real progress, sometimes feels like loss. Not the loss of money or opportunity, but the loss of approval, familiarity, and emotional comfort. You begin to notice that saying no costs you warmth. Silence costs you connection. Choosing the long view costs you immediate relief. It feels unfair, even destabilizing, to realize that moving forward can mean leaving something behind, especially when what you are leaving isn't obviously harmful, just comfortably familiar. This is often the point where people turn back, not because the path is wrong, but because the discomfort is misunderstood. We are taught, subtly and repeatedly, that the right path should feel affirming, that growth should feel encouraging, that success should feel good as it unfolds. When it doesn't, we assume something is broken, usually within ourselves. But what if that assumption is the real misunderstanding? There is an old line, attributed to Seneca, that feels particularly relevant here. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The discomfort you feel is rarely about actual danger. It is about emotional signals that evolve to protect belonging, not long-term alignment. The nervous system doesn't care about where you'll be in 10 years. It cares about whether you're accepted right now. When those two priorities collide, discomfort is inevitable. Slowly, almost reluctantly, another interpretation begins to surface. What if this unease is not evidence that you are doing something wrong, but evidence that you are doing something new? What if the emotional resistance is not a wall, but a threshold? Growth often announces itself not with confidence, but with quiet internal tension. Not with certainty, but with a strange mix of clarity and unease coexisting in the same moment. Think about the last time you made a decision that truly mattered. Not a dramatic one, but a quiet one. A choice no one applauded. A boundary, no one noticed. A restraint, no one rewarded. Chances are, it didn't feel good in the conventional sense. It felt lonely. It felt heavy. And yet, something in you knew it mattered. That knowing didn't shout. It didn't argue. It simply waited. This is where the narrative most people inherit begins to fail them. We are conditioned to treat discomfort as a warning sign, something to be avoided or resolved immediately. But some forms of discomfort are not alarms. They are signals of transition. They appear when old emotional rewards no longer align with the direction you are moving. They surface when approval and progress stop pointing in the same direction. As Napoleon Hill once wrote, every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The seed in this case is awareness, the realization that not all discomfort is destructive. Some of it is instructive. Some of it is the cost of stepping into a more deliberate, self-directed way of living. And so, an unspoken question begins to linger beneath the surface of your thoughts. What if the unease you've been trying to escape is actually inviting you to listen more closely? What if it is asking you to grow into a version of yourself that no longer needs constant validation to move forward? This question does not demand an answer right away. It simply opens a door. In the chapters ahead, we will walk through what lies beyond that door. Not to glorify discomfort, but to understand it. Not to reject approval, but to loosen its grip. Because the truth is, the path toward lasting wealth, financial and otherwise, often begins not with confidence, but with the courage to sit with a feeling that doesn't yet make sense. And sometimes, that quiet discomfort is not the end of certainty, but the beginning of clarity. Most people grow up with a quiet assumption about success. They believe that when they are on the right path, life should feel affirming. Effort should be met with encouragement. Progress should feel fair, noticeable, and socially rewarded. When you do the right thing, people should nod in agreement. When you sacrifice, someone should recognize it. And when you grow, it should feel good almost immediately. This belief is rarely spoken out loud, but it shapes expectations in powerful ways. That is why so many people feel confused when real progress begins to unfold differently. Instead of praise, there is silence. Instead of reassurance, there is uncertainty. Instead of feeling validated, there is an odd sense of emotional deprivation. You work harder, yet feel less seen. You become more disciplined, yet feel less celebrated. At first, this feels like a mistake. Surely progress is supposed to feel rewarding, not lonely. Surely, growth is supposed to feel warm, not slightly cold. But meaningful progress has never followed emotional convenience. In finance, the earliest stages of building wealth rarely feel satisfying. Savings grow slowly. Sacrifices feel immediate. The rewards are distant and abstract. In personal growth, the same pattern applies. The habits that shape your future often strip away the pleasures that defined your past. Late nights are replaced with early mornings. Impulses are replaced with restraint. Familiar comforts are replaced with quiet discipline. The emotional payoff does not arrive on schedule. Imagine leaving a bright harbor at night. The shoreline is alive with lights, voices, and movement. Everything feels safe because it is visible and familiar. As the boat moves forward, the lights fade, the water darkens, the noise disappears. Nothing about the open water feels immediately reassuring, even if it is the correct route. Growth often feels exactly like this. You are not lost, but you are no longer comforted by the familiar signals that once told you everything was okay. This is where many people turn back. Not because the destination is wrong, but because the emotional transition feels unsettling. Emotional friction is misinterpreted as moral error. Discomfort is treated as evidence of misalignment. People assume that if something feels heavy, awkward, or isolating, it must be unhealthy or selfish. They retreat toward what feels emotionally safe, even if it keeps them financially, professionally, or personally stagnant. The irony is that this retreat is rarely caused by laziness. Most people are not failing because they lack effort. They are failing because they are still negotiating their growth with the need for approval. They want progress, but only if it can be explained easily. They want discipline, but only if it is admired. They want wealth, but only if it does not create emotional distance. This constant negotiation dilutes momentum. It forces every decision to pass through an invisible approval filter. Morgan Housel once observed that the most important financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. The same is true emotionally. When your internal goalpost is approval, success never stabilizes. It shifts with opinions, moods, and social feedback. One day you feel confident. The next day you doubt everything. But when your goalpost becomes direction rather than validation, something steadier begins to form. You stop asking whether a choice feels good today and start asking whether it makes sense over time. This shift does not happen all at once. It begins quietly. You notice moments where doing the right thing feels emotionally wrong. You save instead of spend and feel excluded. You say no instead of yes and feel misunderstood. You stay silent instead of explaining and feel uneasy. At first, these moments feel like small personal failures. Over time, they begin to look like evidence of growth. James Clear once wrote, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become." Votes are often cast quietly, without applause. No one claps when you choose patience. No one congratulates you for restraint. No one celebrates your long-term thinking in the moment it costs you comfort. Yet these are the votes that compound. These are the choices that shape identity long before they shape results. Slowly, a realization begins to settle in. What feels wrong emotionally may be right directionally. The discomfort is not pointing you away from progress, but through it. The lack of validation is not punishment, but proof that you are no longer outsourcing your decisions to the emotional temperature of the room. You are learning to move forward without being constantly affirmed. This realization is subtle, but it changes everything. You stop expecting growth to feel fair in real time. You stop measuring progress by applause. You begin to trust quiet consistency over visible approval. And in doing so, you step into a different relationship with effort itself. Effort is no longer a performance. It becomes a commitment. This is the philosophical foundation beneath the millionaire mind that feels uncomfortable to admit. It is not about superiority or coldness. It is about emotional independence. The willingness to endure temporary emotional discomfort in service of long-term alignment. The ability to walk into open water without demanding immediate reassurance from the shore. Once this foundation is understood, the journey ahead becomes clearer. Not easier, but clearer. Because when you stop confusing discomfort with danger, you gain access to a deeper kind of stability. And from that stability, decisions become calmer, more deliberate, and far more powerful. Emotional independence does not arrive with an announcement. It does not declare itself as a breakthrough or demand recognition. It settles in quietly, almost unnoticed at first, and yet it begins to change everything. What once felt urgent slowly loses its grip, and what once felt optional starts to feel essential. You notice that not every message needs an immediate reply. Not every opportunity deserves a rushed yes, and not every emotion requires a reaction. The pace of your inner world begins to slow, even as the clarity of your decisions improves. This shift often surprises people because it does not feel powerful in the conventional sense. There is no surge of confidence or dramatic sense of control. Instead, there is space. Space between stimulus and response. Space between feeling and action. In that space, detachment emerges, not as coldness, but as patience. You learn to sit with unresolved feelings without needing to fix them immediately. You discover that discomfort does not demand resolution. Sometimes it simply asks to be acknowledged and allowed to pass. In practical terms, this patience begins to reshape your daily choices. The moments that matter most are rarely the loud ones. They are the quiet decisions about when to speak and when to stay silent, when to push and when to wait. You realize that a well-timed pause can preserve more momentum than a passionate explanation. A calm delay can protect clarity better than an emotional defense. These small choices do not look impressive, but they compound in ways that dramatic gestures rarely do. There is a particular kind of relief that comes from realizing you do not owe everyone an explanation for your direction. Many people feel an almost reflexive need to justify their choices, especially when those choices disrupt expectations. They explain to be understood, to soften discomfort, to restore harmony, but over time, you may notice something subtle. Every explanation pulls energy outward. Every justification invites negotiation. Silence, on the other hand, often preserves focus. This does not mean withdrawing from relationships or becoming distant. It means recognizing that not every internal process benefits from external commentary. Some goals need quiet to grow. Some plans need time to strengthen before they are exposed to opinion. The listener often recalls moments when saying less protected progress more than saying more ever could, not because the truth was wrong, but because the timing was not yet right. As this pattern repeats, discomfort begins to change its texture. What once felt alarming becomes familiar. The unease that used to trigger anxiety now registers as a signal you understand. It still appears, but it no longer carries the same authority. You begin to trust yourself enough to let the feeling exist without obeying it. This is not numbness, it is familiarity. Like a muscle that has learned to hold weight without trembling, your emotional system grows steadier. There is a passage by Viktor Frankl that captures this moment well. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Emotional independence expands that space. It gives you access to choice where there used to be reflex. And with choice comes responsibility, not the heavy kind, but the clarifying kind. You begin to see that every response is shaping more than the moment. It is shaping your trajectory. With this awareness, deeper psychological trade-offs come into focus. You start to notice how often people sacrifice long-term clarity for short-term relief. They speak to ease tension. They spend to soothe discomfort. They commit to avoid disappointment. None of these choices are wrong in isolation. But repeated over time, they create lives that feel busy, reactive, and strangely unsatisfying. Emotional independence asks a harder question. What am I optimizing for? In finance, this question is obvious. You either optimize for immediate consumption or long-term security. In life, the trade-off is quieter but just as real. You either optimize for approval or alignment, for comfort or direction. for relief or growth. The shift you are experiencing does not demand that you abandon warmth, generosity, or connection. It simply asks that you stop letting emotional urgency make your most important decisions. This is where many people begin to feel a new kind of confidence, not the loud, performative kind, but a grounded assurance. You are less reactive because you are less dependent on external validation. You are calmer because you are no longer negotiating every choice with imagined audiences. Your actions become simpler, not because life is easier, but because your criteria for decision-making has clarified. As James Clear once observed, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Emotional independence is a system. It is the internal structure that allows you to act consistently even when emotions fluctuate. It is what enables progress to continue during quiet seasons, misunderstood seasons, and uncomfortable seasons. This foundation does not promise ease. It promises stability. And from that stability, a deeper examination begins to unfold. Once you are no longer ruled by emotional urgency, you can start to explore the more uncomfortable truths beneath success, wealth, and fulfillment. You can ask questions that were previously too threatening to consider. This is where the real work begins, and where the path ahead grows both narrower and clearer. Long before spreadsheets, contracts, or investment strategies enter the picture, there is something far more primitive at work inside us. An internal alarm system that once kept our ancestors alive still hums quietly beneath modern decisions. It reacts instantly to social threat, uncertainty, and exclusion. Thousands of years ago, being misunderstood or rejected could mean danger. Today, that same alarm activates when a decision risks criticism, awkwardness, or disapproval, even when the decision is logically sound. This is where long-term thinking often begins to break down. The alarm does not care about future outcomes. It cares about immediate emotional safety. It asks questions like, will this upset someone? Or, will I look foolish? Or, what will they think of me? Meanwhile, logic is whispering something very different. Logic is saying, this will make sense later, or this aligns with where you're going, or this is the responsible choice. When these two voices collide, the emotional one usually speaks louder. You see this conflict everywhere. Someone knows they should save, but spending offers instant relief. Someone knows they should walk away from a draining commitment, but staying feels safer socially. Someone knows they should stop explaining themselves, but silence feels like rejection. Logic points one way, emotion pulls another, and the tug of war leaves people exhausted. Not because the choice is unclear, but because the emotional cost feels too high. At the center of this tension is a deeply human desire to be understood. Most people want their intentions recognized, their sacrifices acknowledged, their choices affirmed. There is nothing wrong with that desire. It is natural. But when being understood becomes more important than being effective, progress slows quietly. Decisions start to serve image rather than direction. Actions are filtered through how they will be received, not whether they are right. This is especially true in the early stages of any meaningful pursuit. Before results show up, there is little external proof to justify your choices. You are asking others, and often yourself, to trust a process that hasn't yet paid off. When clarity arrives before comfort, it feels disorienting. You know what you should do, but you do not yet feel good doing it. That gap can be deeply unsettling. And yet, this is where many breakthroughs quietly begin. The striking truth is that clarity rarely waits for comfort. We often tell ourselves that once something feels right, we will act. In reality, action often comes first, and emotional comfort follows much later, if at all. People who build something meaningful learn this lesson early, sometimes painfully. They act based on alignment, not applause. Think of a founder who turns down a lucrative but distracting opportunity. On paper, it looks risky. To outsiders, it may even look foolish. Internally, however, there is clarity. The opportunity does not align with the long-term vision. Saying no feels uncomfortable. It invites questions. It creates tension. But saying yes would quietly compromise focus. The founder chooses effectiveness over explanation, and the discomfort becomes part of the cost of clarity. This pattern repeats across different areas of life. Those who progress learn to sit with misunderstanding longer than most. They allow themselves to be seen as wrong before being seen as right. They accept that some decisions will make sense only in hindsight. This is not because they enjoy discomfort, but because they understand its role. Misunderstanding becomes temporary. Misalignment becomes permanent. There is a quiet strength in this ability to wait. Waiting for results. Waiting for perspective. Waiting for the noise to fade. It requires emotional regulation more than intellectual brilliance. Anyone can make a good decision on paper. Far fewer can live with the emotional consequences of that decision without immediately trying to soften it. The urge to explain is powerful because it promises relief. But relief is not the same as progress. Morgan Housel once noted that doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are, and a lot to do with how you behave. The same principle applies here. Behavior under emotional pressure reveals far more than intentions ever could. When you choose to tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term clarity, you are practicing a form of discipline that compounds quietly over time. This brings us to a difficult but necessary question. What if the fear of disapproval costs more than the disapproval itself? What if the energy spent managing perceptions is the very energy needed to move forward? Many people never find out because they avoid the experiment altogether. They choose the familiar discomfort of stagnation over the unfamiliar discomfort of growth. Disapproval, when it comes, is often less catastrophic than imagined. It stings, but it passes. The body adapts. The nervous system learns that nothing broke. Over time, the alarm recalibrates. It still rings, but it rings softer. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable, and what once dictated decisions becomes background noise. This does not mean becoming indifferent to others. It means becoming anchored in something deeper than immediate reaction. You begin to separate your self-worth from momentary approval. You start to value direction over consensus. And in doing so, you gain access to a steadier form of confidence, one that does not need constant reinforcement to function. The path forward does not eliminate emotional alarms. It teaches you how to hear them without obeying them. It teaches you that clarity is often lonely before it is celebrated. And it invites you to consider a powerful possibility that the discomfort you are avoiding may be far less costly than the life you delay by avoiding it. There is a comforting belief many people carry into adulthood, especially into their work and financial lives, that transparency is always virtuous, that saying everything out loud builds trust, and that progress grows faster when intentions are fully visible. It sounds noble, even mature. Be open. Be honest. Explain yourself. Let people see what you're doing and why. In theory, this creates alignment and understanding. In practice, it often creates noise. At first, transparency feels like safety. When you explain your plans, you feel less exposed. When you share your thinking, you feel protected. from misunderstanding. When others know what you're doing, you feel less alone with the responsibility of your choices. But over time, something subtle begins to happen. The more you expose your process, the more your focus starts to fracture. Opinions enter before clarity has settled. Reactions arrive before results have formed. Energy that was meant for building gets redirected toward managing perception. Overexposure does not usually destroy progress outright. It dilutes it. Every explanation invites interpretation. Every shared intention invites feedback. Some of it is helpful, much of it is not, and almost all of it requires emotional bandwidth. You begin to notice that after certain conversations you feel heavier instead of clearer. Not because anyone was cruel, but because too many voices entered a process that needed quiet. What once felt like openness now feels like friction. This is where an unexpected emotion appears. Guilt. Guilt for not sharing enough. Guilt for holding something back. Guilt for choosing discretion when transparency feels morally superior. Many people mistake selectivity for dishonesty. They worry that silence makes them deceptive, that restraint makes them cold, so they overcorrect, they explain again, they justify more. They talk through decisions that are not yet stable enough to stand on their own. But discretion is not deception. There is a difference between hiding and protecting. A seed does not grow faster because it is constantly unearthed and inspected. In fact, the opposite is true. Growth requires darkness, pressure, and time. The same is true of meaningful plans, financial strategies, and personal reinventions. Some things need to strengthen privately before they can survive exposure. Restraint, however, does not feel noble at first. It feels lonely. It feels like standing still while others talk. It feels like withholding warmth in a culture that celebrates sharing. When you stop narrating your every move, you may feel disconnected. Conversations feel shallower. Validation arrives less often. You wonder if you are becoming distant or arrogant. This loneliness is often misread as a sign you are doing something wrong. In reality, it is often a sign that you are doing something differently. There is a moment many people experience when they stop over-explaining. They notice that their days feel quieter, fewer emotional spikes, fewer defensive thoughts. More energy stays internal. At the same time, they notice an ache, a longing to be seen, a desire for someone to say, "I get it." This ache is human. It is the cost of choosing focus over familiarity. Many promising paths are abandoned at this stage, not because they were unsustainable, but because the silence felt unbearable. The noise of validation, even when distracting, felt comforting. The quiet of restraint felt too exposed. So people return to what is loud. They seek environments where effort is noticed immediately, even if it leads nowhere long term. They trade progress for reassurance without realizing the exchange they've made. There is a line from Paulo Coelho that resonates here. People are capable at any time in their lives of doing what they dream of. What often goes unmentioned is how many dreams dissolve, not from lack of ability, but from lack of privacy. From too much explanation before execution. From too much talking before becoming. Silence is not the enemy of progress. In many cases, it is the incubator. Financially, this truth shows up clearly. The most effective strategies often look boring from the outside. They lack drama. They lack constant updates. They do not provide regular opportunities for storytelling. Quiet consistency does not make for exciting conversation, but it does make for results. The same principle applies to personal growth. The most transformative changes are often invisible while they are happening. Over time, a quiet insight begins to settle in. Not everything meaningful needs witnesses. Not every choice needs applause. Not every intention needs to be shared to be valid. You start to understand that trust is built not just through transparency, but through stability, through showing up consistently, through letting results speak when they are ready, not when you are anxious. This insight does not eliminate the desire to be understood. It reframes it. You begin to choose when understanding matters and when it does not. You stop trying to preempt misunderstanding and allow it to pass. You accept that some people will only understand you later, sir, and some may never understand you at all. This acceptance is not resignation. It is maturity. James Clear once wrote, "You should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results." Restraint protects trajectory. It shields direction from premature interference. It allows momentum to build without constant recalibration. And while it may feel lonely in the moment, it often leads to a deeper sense of self-trust over time. As this realization takes hold, the loneliness softens. It is replaced by a quieter confidence. You no longer need to narrate your growth to believe in it. You no longer need witnesses to feel aligned. The silence becomes less heavy and more spacious. And in that space, something important becomes possible: sustained progress without emotional leakage. This understanding does not ask you to withdraw from the world. It invites you to engage with it more deliberately, to speak when it adds value, to share when it strengthens connection, and to remain silent when silence protects what you are still becoming. This balance is not easy, but it is powerful, and it prepares you for the next, deeper layer of mastery that lies ahead. There comes a moment, quiet, almost ordinary, when you begin to notice your reactions instead of immediately following them. Nothing dramatic announces this shift. You still feel the same emotions rise in your chest. The same impulses still appear, but something subtle changes in how you relate to them. You pause just long enough to observe what is happening inside you, and in that pause, awareness begins to dawn. Before this moment, reactions often felt like instructions. Anxiety meant, act now. Guilt meant, explain yourself. Discomfort meant, fix the feeling as quickly as possible. Decisions were shaped less by where you were going and more by what would make the feeling go away. Emotional relief became the hidden compass, quietly steering choices that looked rational on the surface but were driven by an urgent need for comfort underneath. Once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. You begin to recognize how often decisions were made not because they aligned with your long-term direction, but because they offered immediate emotional easing. You stayed in situations longer than necessary because leaving felt awkward. You said yes when your body wanted to say no because refusal felt heavy. You spent money, time, or energy not to build something meaningful, but to calm an internal restlessness. These realizations are not accusations, they are clarifications. With awareness comes a subtle shift in mindset. You stop trying to eliminate emotion and start learning how to coexist with it. Feelings are no longer enemies to defeat or commands to obey. They become information, sometimes useful, sometimes misleading, but no longer absolute. You begin to act with less force because you are no longer pushing against yourself. Outcomes start to follow naturally, not because you are trying harder, but because you are wasting less energy on internal conflict. This is where many people expect doubt to disappear. It does not. Doubt remains part of the landscape. The difference is that it no longer holds the steering wheel. Doubt becomes a passenger, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but no longer in charge of direction. You learn that confidence is not the absence of uncertainty, but the ability to move forward despite it. Progress no longer waits for perfect emotional conditions. Think of a seasoned sailor navigating rough waters. The waves still rise, the wind still shifts. The conditions are never fully controlled, but the ship stays its course because the sailor understands the sea well enough not to panic at every swell. Emotional waves work the same way. They still arrive. They still carry intensity, but with awareness, they break without steering the ship. This steadiness changes how growth feels. It becomes less dramatic. There are fewer emotional highs and fewer crushing lows. The journey no longer depends on motivation spikes or emotional breakthroughs. Instead, it is sustained by rhythm, by showing up consistently, by making decisions that feel calm rather than urgent. This kind of growth rarely looks impressive in real time, but it endures. There is a passage attributed to Seneca that captures this beautifully. He who is brave is free. Bravery, in this sense, is not loud courage. It is the quiet willingness to let emotions pass without surrendering direction to them. It is the freedom that comes from not needing immediate relief to keep going. This freedom is subtle, but it is transformative. Financially, this shift is profound. Decisions stop being reactive. You no longer chase returns to escape fear or spend to soothe anxiety. You invest patiently. You save consistently. You think in years instead of days. The same principle applies to relationships, career choices, and personal boundaries. When reactions are noticed instead of obeyed, choices become cleaner. They carry less emotional residue. What surprises many people is how peaceful this stage feels. Not euphoric, not triumphant, but calm. The internal noise softens. The constant self-negotiation quiets down. You stop arguing with yourself about every choice. That calm does not mean life is easy. It means you are no longer fighting yourself while living it. This stability also brings a new kind of humility. You realize how much of your past behavior was shaped by invisible emotional forces. You forgive yourself for choices made in pursuit of relief rather than alignment. And in that forgiveness, you gain patience for yourself and for others who are still caught in the cycle of reaction. James Clear once noted that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Awareness is the beginning of that compounding, not because it changes everything at once, but because it changes how everything accumulates. Each small moment of restraint, each paused reaction, each choice made from direction instead of relief adds up, slowly, quietly, reliably. Growth at this stage does not announce itself. There are no sharp turning points. Instead, there is continuity. You wake up and do the work. You feel the emotion and let it pass. You choose again and then again. Over time, the results become visible, not because you chase them, but because you stop chasing comfort. This is the kind of progress that feels almost boring from the outside. But from the inside, it feels grounded, sustainable, real. And as this steadiness becomes familiar, it prepares you for a deeper truth still waiting to be explored. The realization that true mastery is not about controlling life, but about regulating yourself within it. There is a stage in this journey where struggle no longer feels sharp. It hasn't disappeared, but it has softened. What once felt like constant resistance now feels more like weight you know how to carry. Silence, which once felt threatening and empty, begins to feel spacious. You no longer rush to fill it with explanations, activity, or reassurance. Instead, you start to notice that silence is where understanding often settles. This is the moment when external success quietly loses its role as emotional currency. Achievements still matter, but they are no longer responsible for calming your inner world. You stop expecting outcomes to stabilize your mood or validate your choices. Something deeper takes over: alignment, the sense that what you are doing matches who you are becoming. It's less exciting than applause, but far more grounding. You realize that chasing results to feel okay is exhausting, and trusting alignment to carry you forward is sustainable. There is a useful image to hold here. Imagine a traveler at sea for the first time. Early on, they rely on the shoreline for direction. As long as lights are visible, they feel safe. But the farther they go, the less reliable those lights become. Eventually, they must learn to navigate by the stars. The stars don't shout. They don't change based on opinion or weather. They simply are. In the same way, your direction becomes internal. You stop navigating by approval and start navigating by principle. This transition can feel unsettling at first. Without constant feedback, you may wonder if you're still on the right path. But over time, something unexpected happens. The less you chase approval, the more space you create for better outcomes to emerge. This is one of the great paradoxes of progress. When you stop performing for validation, your actions become cleaner. Decisions sharpen. Focus deepens. And ironically, results often improve. It's not because people suddenly like you more. It's because you are no longer diluted by the need to be liked. You choose projects that matter instead of projects that impress. You set boundaries that protect energy instead of boundaries that look polite. You invest time and money where they compound, not where they soothe insecurity. Letting go of approval removes friction you didn't realize you were carrying. Peace, at this stage, comes from an unexpected place, not certainty, not guarantees, not knowing exactly how everything will unfold. Peace comes from self-regulation, from trusting your ability to respond wisely regardless of circumstances. You learn that stability does not come from predicting life, but from managing yourself within it. That realization changes the emotional tone of everything you do. Think about how this applies to money. Early on, financial decisions are often emotional. Fear drives hoarding. Anxiety drives spending. Comparison drives risk. But as self-regulation strengthens, money becomes quieter. You no longer need it to prove anything. You no longer use it to manage feelings. You deploy it deliberately, calmly, strategically. The same external tool, but a completely different internal relationship. This internal shift also changes how you experience success. Wins feel lighter, losses feel less personal. You are no longer swinging between euphoria and despair. Instead, you move with a steadier rhythm. There is room for satisfaction without attachment and disappointment without collapse. This emotional steadiness is rarely celebrated, but it is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. There is a line often attributed to Epictetus that captures this phase well. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Identity leads. Outcomes follow. When alignment becomes your anchor, decisions feel simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You stop asking, "How will this look?" and start asking, "Is this consistent?" That single shift removes enormous cognitive and emotional noise. At some point, you notice that you are no longer trying to escape discomfort. You accept it as part of the terrain. You don't dramatize it. You don't romanticize it. You simply move with it. This acceptance doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. Energy once spent resisting reality is now available for shaping it. This is also where integration begins. The ideas you've encountered so far stop feeling theoretical. They start to show up in daily life, in how you respond to a tense conversation, in how you plan your week, in how you handle uncertainty. There is less effort to apply wisdom because it has already begun to operate through you. Behavior follows understanding naturally. James Clear once observed that the most powerful outcomes are delayed. At this stage, you truly feel that truth. You are no longer rushing the process. You trust that consistency, guided by alignment, will do its work. You are no longer trying to arrive quickly. You are trying to move correctly. The sense of readiness that emerges here is quiet. It doesn't announce itself as confidence. It feels more like steadiness, like knowing you can handle what comes next, even if you don't know exactly what that is. You are no longer waiting for certainty to act, nor approval to proceed. You are prepared to integrate what you've learned into how you live. And as this integration deepens, you begin to sense that the journey is no longer about accumulating insight, but about embodying it, about letting wisdom shape not just your thinking, but your pace, your priorities, and your presence. This is where the work becomes less about striving and more about being, and where the next phase of reflection naturally begins. At some point in this journey, all the tensions you've been carrying begin to converge. The questions about approval and alignment, the pull between comfort and clarity, the struggle between reacting and choosing. They stop competing for attention and start forming a single, coherent realization. You begin to see that beneath all of it lies the same quiet truth. Your life is shaped less by what happens to you and more by what you repeatedly choose to do with what happens. Responsibility, once mistaken for burden, reveals itself as agency. This is often the moment when you revisit the original discomfort that started everything. That early sense that something felt off, even though nothing was visibly wrong. Before, it felt like confusion, maybe even like weakness. Now, it looks different. You recognize it as a marker of growth, a signal that your internal standards were evolving faster than your external circumstances. That discomfort wasn't trying to stop you, it was trying to orient you. With that understanding, philosophy, emotion, and practicality begin to align, without force. You no longer have to convince yourself to do the disciplined thing. You no longer need to suppress emotion to act wisely. The pieces begin to work together. Emotion informs you, philosophy grounds you, and practicality guides your next step. Decisions stop feeling like battles and start feeling like expressions of who you are becoming. This alignment changes how you see wealth, not as a finish line that grants peace, but as a byproduct of psychological steadiness. You notice that people who are calm under pressure, patient with process, and consistent in behavior tend to make better financial decisions over time, not because they are immune to emotion, but because they are not ruled by it. Wealth accumulates around those who can delay relief in favor of direction. It becomes clear that money does not create stability. Stability attracts money. The ability to sit with uncertainty, to avoid impulsive decisions, to think in longer time horizons, these are psychological skills before they are financial ones. When those skills are present, money tends to follow. When they are absent, money often magnifies chaos. This reframing removes a tremendous amount of pressure. You stop chasing wealth as an emotional solution and start treating it as a practical outcome. There is a moment of simplicity that follows this realization, a sense that the core lesson is not complicated at all. Choose direction over relief, again and again. When faced with a choice, ask which option aligns with where you want to be rather than how you want to feel right now. This question does not guarantee ease, but it offers clarity. And clarity, over time, is far more valuable than comfort. You begin to see how often urgency distorted your past decisions, how the need to act quickly was rarely about necessity and often about discomfort. Reflection now replaces that urgency. You pause more. You think in longer arcs. You let decisions breathe before committing to them. This doesn't slow progress, it steadies it. The pace becomes intentional rather than reactive. There is a quiet confidence that grows here, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that settles in your posture and your timing. You no longer feel rushed to prove anything. You don't need to broadcast your intentions or defend your boundaries. You trust that consistent direction will speak louder than explanations ever could. This trust is earned, not assumed, built through repeated moments of choosing alignment when relief was available. Napoleon Hill once wrote that self-discipline begins with the mastery of your thoughts. In this phase, you feel that mastery not as control, but as cooperation. Thoughts still arise, emotions still fluctuate, but they no longer hijack the process. You are not suppressing yourself, you are steering yourself. That distinction makes all the difference. As reflection deepens, you also notice a gentler relationship with your past. Regret loosens its grip. You see earlier choices not as failures, but as data, evidence of who you were before you learned how to choose differently. This perspective creates compassion rather than criticism. And compassion, directed inward, reinforces steadiness rather than undermining it. The world around you may not change dramatically at first. Results still take time, but your experience of moving toward them feels fundamentally different. There is less friction, less internal argument, more continuity between intention and action. You are no longer trying to escape discomfort. You are using it as information. You are no longer chasing relief. You are building direction. James Clear has observed that success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations. This section of the journey makes that truth tangible. You feel how small, repeated choices, made from steadiness rather than urgency, accumulate quietly, not into a dramatic breakthrough, but into a stable trajectory, one that can carry weight without collapsing. As this understanding settles, there is no rush to move on, no need to immediately optimize or accelerate. Reflection has replaced urgency, and in that space, integration happens naturally. You begin to live the lesson rather than think about it. And as you do, a deeper calm takes hold, one that does not depend on outcomes, but makes better outcomes far more likely. This is not the end of the journey, but it is a turning point. From here on, growth is less about learning something new and more about staying true to what you now understand. The quiet work of choosing direction over relief continues, and in that continuation, something enduring is built, not just wealth, but a way of moving through life with clarity, responsibility, and peace. As this chapter unfolds, the tone naturally softens. The urgency that once drove Estes' every thought begins to loosen its grip, and in its place comes a quieter, more forgiving perspective. You find yourself looking back, not with regret, but with curiosity. Old moments that once carried embarrassment or shame now appear differently, as if seen through gentler light. What once hurt now speaks, not to accuse you, but to teach you. There is something powerful about revisiting old pain when you are no longer inside it. Decisions you once labeled as failures begin to reveal themselves as early lessons, shaped by the awareness you had at the time. You did what you knew how to do, with the tools you had, under pressures you didn't yet understand. That realization does not excuse every choice, but it contextualizes them. It replaces harsh judgment with honest reflection. This is where acceptance quietly enters the room. Not the kind that shrugs and says, "It doesn't matter," but the kind that says, "It mattered, and I survived it." You stop replaying moments in your mind, wishing you had been wiser sooner. You recognize that wisdom arrives when it is earned, not when it is demanded. And in that recognition, the inner critic begins to soften its voice. Many people never reach this point because they are too busy punishing themselves for not knowing earlier what they know now. But growth does not work backward. It moves forward, one realization at a time. When acceptance replaces self-judgment, something unexpected happens. Energy returns. The mental space, once occupied by regret, opens up for clarity. You are no longer trying to fix the past. You are finally free to shape the present. Along with acceptance comes a subtle but profound sense of freedom. Freedom from the need to be fully understood. You realize how much emotional effort you once spent explaining yourself, defending your intentions, or hoping someone would finally say, "I see why you did that." Letting go of that need does not make you distant. It makes you lighter. You begin to understand that being misunderstood is not a personal failure. It is often a temporary condition of growth. There is relief in realizing that not everyone has to understand your journey for it to be valid. Some people can only meet you at the version of yourself they remember. Others are not meant to walk alongside you into who you are becoming. This is not a loss, it is a sorting. When you stop demanding universal understanding, you gain a deeper connection with yourself. And that connection proves far more stabilizing than approval ever was. With this shift, peace begins to show up in a new form, not as excitement, not as triumph, but as steadiness. You stop tying your sense of calm to milestones or arrivals. You no longer believe that peace will come once you get there. Instead, you feel it in how you move, in how you respond, in how you choose. Peace becomes something you practice, not something you wait for. This steadiness shows up in ordinary moments, in how you handle a difficult conversation without spiraling, in how you experience a setback without collapsing into self-doubt, in how you make decisions without needing them to feel perfect. The drama fades. Life becomes less about emotional extremes and more about continuity. You are no longer chasing the feeling of being finished. You are learning to be present. There is a humility woven into this stage. You recognize that you are still learning, still adjusting, still growing. But that realization no longer feels threatening. It feels honest. You stop pretending to have everything figured out and stop apologizing for not having it all solved. You allow yourself to be human, thoughtful, imperfect, and evolving. This humanity becomes grounding. You notice that the people you admire most are not the ones who appear flawless, but the ones who move through life with quiet self-respect. They are not rushed. They are not defensive. They are not constantly proving themselves. They trust their pace. And slowly, you begin to trust yours. There is a line often attributed to Carl Jung that fits this moment well. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." When you internalize this, reflection stops being painful and starts being useful. You are no longer defined by old chapters. You are informed by them. And that distinction changes how you carry yourself forward. As this reflection deepens, you may notice a surprising tenderness toward your younger self, the version of you who was trying, guessing, and sometimes failing without guidance. Instead of criticism, you feel gratitude. Gratitude for their effort. Gratitude for their resilience. Gratitude for the path they walked so you could stand where you are now. This gratitude does not trap you in the past. It anchors you in the present. The reflection feels grounded because it is no longer performative. You are not reflecting to impress, justify, or dramatize. You are reflecting to understand, to integrate, to move forward with less internal friction. There is a sense that nothing needs to be proven anymore, not to others and not to yourself. And in this grounded state, you sense a quiet readiness, not for a dramatic leap, but for deeper peace, for moving forward without dragging old stories behind you, for allowing life to unfold without forcing meaning into every moment. This is not the end of the journey, but it is a place of rest along the way, a place where you can breathe, steady yourself, and prepare for the deeper emotional resolutions still to come. Here, you are not chasing growth. You are inhabiting it. At some point along this path, gratitude begins to emerge from an unexpected place. Not gratitude for ease or comfort, but for the very discomfort that once felt unfair. You look back at the moments that frustrated you, slowed you down, or made you doubt yourself, and you see them differently now. They were not interruptions to your growth. They were the terrain that shaped it. What once felt like resistance reveals itself as refinement. This kind of gratitude is quiet. It does not announce itself with enthusiasm or relief. It arrives slowly, like a realization you didn't know you were waiting for. You begin to understand that without those uncomfortable seasons, you might never have learned patience. Without those moments of uncertainty, you might never have learned to trust yourself. The discomfort that once felt like punishment now looks more like preparation. With that gratitude comes humility, a gentle, grounding humility that recognizes growth as imperfect and ongoing. You no longer see personal development as a straight line or a finish line. You see it as a process, one that unfolds in layers, revisiting the same lessons from higher levels of understanding. You stop expecting yourself to be finished. You allow yourself to still be learning. This humility changes how you relate to others as well. You become less rigid in your judgments, less eager to categorize people as ahead or behind. You recognize yourself in their struggles, just as they might one day recognize themselves in yours. Growth, you realize, does not make you superior. It makes you more aware. And awareness, when paired with humility, becomes wisdom. What surprises many people at this stage is that inner calm can exist alongside unresolved questions. You do not need every answer to feel steady. You do not need complete certainty to feel grounded. Some questions remain open, not as sources of anxiety, but as companions on the journey. You stop demanding closure from life and start trusting continuity instead. This calm feels different from the calm you once imagined. It is not the calm of control or certainty. It is the calm of self-trust, the knowledge that whatever arises, you will meet it with thoughtfulness rather than panic. That confidence does not depend on circumstances. It depends on how you have learned to relate to them. The journey, at this point, begins to feel quiet, almost sacred in its simplicity. You are no longer chasing breakthroughs or dramatic transformations. You are paying attention to your choices, to your reactions, to your inner state. The noise that once accompanied ambition fades, replaced by a deeper listening. You move through your days with intention rather than urgency. There is something deeply freeing about this simplicity. You realize how much energy you once spent trying to prove yourself through success, through explanation, through constant motion. Now, that impulse has softened. Nothing needs to be proven anymore. Not your worth, not your intelligence, not your direction. You are no longer performing your life, you are living it. This does not mean you stop striving or caring. It means your striving is no longer fueled by insecurity. Your effort comes from alignment rather than anxiety. You work because it matters, not because you are trying to silence doubt. You build because it feels right, not because you are trying to impress an invisible audience. That shift makes effort feel lighter, even when the work itself is demanding. There is a moment many people describe at this stage, a sense of coming home to themselves, not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle one. You recognize your own patterns. You understand your triggers. You respect your limits. And instead of fighting these truths, you work with them. Life becomes less of a negotiation and more of a collaboration. This is also where comparison finally loosens its grip. You stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. You see that everyone is carrying something invisible. Everyone is learning something slowly. And everyone, no matter how polished their exterior looks, is still figuring it out. This realization does not make you complacent. It makes you patient. You may still have ambitions, financial goals, personal visions, but they no longer feel desperate. They are held with a steady hand. You understand now that rushing the process does not accelerate it, that forcing clarity often delays it. So, you allow things to unfold at the pace they require, not the pace your fear demands. There is a quote often attributed to Lao Tzu that feels fitting here. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. You begin to feel that truth in your own life. Progress continues, quietly and reliably, without constant pressure. You are no longer trying to outrun discomfort or uncertainty. You have learned to walk with them. As this reflection deepens, a readiness settles in. Not the readiness to act impulsively, but the readiness to receive final wisdom. You are open, not because you lack answers, but because you are no longer defensive. You are not seeking validation. You are seeking understanding. That openness creates space for insight to land where it once would have been resisted. The journey has not made you flawless. It has made you honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your strengths. Honest about what truly matters to you. And that honesty is what gives you peace. Not the peace of arrival, but the peace of alignment. You sense that you are standing at the edge of something meaningful. Not a conclusion, but a distillation. Everything you've experienced, every discomfort, every pause, every quiet decision has been shaping you for this moment. You are ready now, not because you have mastered life, but because you have learned how to meet it. And with that readiness, the final wisdom can finally be heard. As the journey comes into view as a whole, one truth stands out with quiet certainty. Wealth does not begin as a number. It begins as a psychological posture. Long before accounts grow or assets accumulate, something internal shifts. A way of standing in the world changes. Decisions slow down. Reactions soften. Direction becomes clearer than impulse. The outer results that people admire are usually just the visible echoes of an inner orientation that was established much earlier. This is why emotional independence sits at the center of everything you've explored. Not independence from people, but independence from the need for immediate emotional relief. The ability to tolerate discomfort without needing to escape it, to act without being constantly affirmed, to choose without being hurried by fear or flattered by praise. Over time, this capacity becomes the foundation on which lasting outcomes are built. Without it, success remains fragile. With it, progress comes durable. What makes this truth powerful is that it does not stop with money. It quietly extends into identity, relationships, and time itself. When you no longer rely on approval to move forward, you stop performing versions of yourself that don't fit. You begin to act from alignment rather than expectation. Relationships become more honest because they are less transactional. You no longer trade authenticity for acceptance, and time, perhaps most importantly, changes its meaning. You stop rushing toward imagined futures and start investing in trajectories that make sense over years, not moments. There is an aha moment that often arrives here, not as a sudden flash, but as a settled understanding. Progress asks for courage before it offers comfort. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to move without guarantees. The courage to sit with uncertainty while continuing forward anyway. Comfort, when it comes, arrives later and more quietly than expected. It shows up as stability, as confidence without bravado, as peace that does not depend on conditions. Many people spend their lives waiting for clarity to feel obvious before they act. But clarity rarely shouts. It does not compete for attention. It waits patiently beneath the noise, becoming easier to hear only when urgency fades. When you stop demanding certainty, clarity finds room to speak. When you stop rushing decisions, direction reveals itself. This is not mystical. It is psychological. A calmer mind perceives what a frantic one cannot. In this space, discomfort undergoes a transformation. What was once feared becomes familiar. What once felt like resistance begins to feel like information. Discomfort becomes a trusted signal, not a command, but a guide. It tells you when growth is happening, when old patterns are loosening, when you are choosing something new over something comfortable. Instead of asking how to eliminate discomfort, you learn to ask what it is pointing toward. This reframing changes everything. You no longer measure progress by how good something feels in the moment. You measure it by whether it aligns with the person you are becoming. This is the difference between motion and momentum. Motion reacts. Momentum compounds, and momentum is built not through intensity, but through consistency guided by emotional regulation. There is a quiet dignity in this way of living. You are no longer trying to win arguments with life. You are not trying to force outcomes to arrive on your timeline. You are simply showing up, choosing carefully, and allowing time to do what it does best: compound what is steady. This dignity does not seek attention. It does not need validation. It is self-contained. James Clear once wrote that the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of your identity. The same is true of this mindset. Emotional independence stops being something you practice and starts being something you embody. It becomes how you respond to stress, how you handle opportunity, how you relate to success and failure alike. It becomes your baseline. What emerges from this baseline is not perfection, but resilience. You still feel doubt. You still face uncertainty. But these experiences no longer destabilize you. They inform you. You trust yourself to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. And that trust, built slowly over time, becomes one of the most valuable assets you possess. This is why so many people misunderstand the millionaire mind. They look for tactics instead of temperament. They study strategies instead of psychology. But the real advantage is internal. It is the ability to delay relief, to withstand silence, to choose direction even when it costs approval. Everything else is downstream from that. As this understanding settles, there is no need to rush forward, no need to immediately apply or optimize. Wisdom does not demand urgency. It invites integration. It asks to be lived quietly, consistently, and without performance. The work now is not to accumulate more insight, but to honor what you already know. If there is one final reflection to hold, it is this: wealth, in its most enduring form, is not what you collect. It is what you can withstand. The ability to remain steady when things are unclear, to remain patient when progress is invisible, to remain aligned when comfort is unavailable. That steadiness is rare, and it is powerful. Clarity will continue to wait for you whenever you slow down enough to listen. Discomfort will continue to guide you whenever you move in the right direction. And courage will continue to be asked of you, not as a test, but as an invitation. An invitation to live deliberately, to choose wisely, and to trust that what is built from emotional independence will last far longer than anything built on relief alone. This is not the end of the journey. It is the point where the journey becomes yours. As we come to the end of this conversation, there is one thing worth pausing to acknowledge. Not an achievement, not a breakthrough, but your willingness to stay present with unease, to listen when things felt unclear, to remain open when certainty was unavailable. That willingness is rare, and it matters more than most people realize. Growth does not begin with answers. It begins with the courage to remain attentive when questions linger. If there is one lesson to carry forward, it is this: growth often whispers before it rewards. It does not announce itself with confidence or clarity. It shows up as subtle discomfort, as a quiet sense that something is shifting beneath the surface. Most people rush past these moments, eager to feel better, to feel certain. But those who pause, who listen, who allow the whisper to finish its sentence, often find themselves moving in a direction that feels truer over time. There is no urgency here, no need to act immediately or prove anything to anyone. Reflection has a way of settling when it is not forced. The insights you've encountered will continue to surface in small, ordinary moments. When you choose patience over impulse, direction over relief, steadiness over speed, you don't need to hold on to them tightly. Let them integrate naturally at the pace that fits your life. The journey does not end here. It continues quietly, deliberately, and on your own terms. There will be days of clarity and days of doubt, moments of progress and moments of pause. All of it belongs. What matters is not how quickly you move, but how honestly you choose. So take a breath. Trust the steadiness you've been building. And remember, nothing meaningful is ever rushed.